We're ready to get going. So welcome LC members, welcome Convergence guests and friends. As you log on, please use the chat feature to let us know where you're zooming in from. I know we've got, excuse me, people joining from across the country, and it'd be great to just have a sense of where everyone is. So please do that in the chat. A couple of housekeeping pieces. We are recording the session. You'll be able to see that noted. We are going to have a formal break during the day, but you should obviously, if you need to take a break at any point, you should feel free to do that. Often we turn off our screens and that lets us know that person's away from their screen, and then turn it back on when you come back. And snacks are welcome. Sorry, we would normally be providing snacks and directing you to the restrooms down the hall, but you can take care of that yourself. If you're using social media, please tag us. Facebook and Twitter handles for Convergence are @Convergence Center, and we're going to post those in the chat as well. And we'll like to tag each other. And I would say, as a general matter, throughout the day, please do keep an eye on the chat. We're going to communicate with you there throughout the program, and we encourage you to communicate with us that way and with each other as well. We have over 100 people that registered, and with such a large group, we have to depend heavily on the chat for interaction, along with some breakout sessions and polling, but we'll rely on the chat more than we can use the raise hands feature when we have a smaller group. So for those of you that have been coming to Convergence Leadership Council meetings for a while, this is, well, not your mother's LC meeting. In addition to the obvious being on Zoom and having over 100 participants, this is also a really critical time in our country, and we want to lean into that moment with you, our community. So our agenda today looks a little different than our normal LC agenda. We're going to, excuse me, we're going to focus on processing the election and its implications for Convergence, and on what we can do as bridge builders in many different contexts, in the context of our projects, the work of our Congress, and with colleague organizations. We're going to talk with several colleagues who are in the bridge building field. We'll give an award to Congressman Kilmer for his leadership in bridge building, and he'll be joining us for that. And then we'll take an important moment to consider our own work as the Leadership Council and how we can most effectively support all of the above. So to accomplish all of that and not keep you on Zoom for the usual 5-hour LC meeting, we had to innovate. So for example, the project update is going to be shorter than normal, and we sent you some content to read ahead of the meeting to compensate for that. We're not going to be starting the meeting with the usual CEO remarks, but instead we'll hear from David throughout the day. And David, of course, was integral to shaping this agenda, and you should feel free, David, to jump in anytime, of course. Another innovation is that we have a very special treat lined up for you during the break. An opportunity to connect and rejuvenate, led by our very own Jessica Dibb, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later. So we hope you will let us know in the evaluation how all of these changes worked for you. So let us get started by turning to the strategic goals that we've set for today. We have 4 goals for today's meeting, and we're going to ask you to take a poll in a second to let us know which of these is most important for you right now. These are our 4 goals for today's meeting. And again, please pick one that is most important. Our goals are to reconnect with each other after 8 months of remote life, managing multiple crises and emerging from this incredibly contentious election. Second goal is to begin to process together the implications of the election for Convergence. Our third goal is to reconsider Convergence's role in the broader bridge building field. And our fourth goal is to consider the best way for the Leadership Council to evolve to support Convergence moving forward. So we think all of these are important, and you'll see these embedded throughout our agenda today, but we'd love to see your responses in the poll to let us know what's top of mind for you, which of these is top of mind for you right now. So we'll give you just a minute to do that.
Where's the poll?
It should have popped up on your screen now.
It should have just popped up.
Okay, just a couple more seconds. Great. Susie, should we share the results? Look at that, about half of you landed on considering Convergence's role in the bridge building space. That's fantastic. And then, of course, the election is high on folks' mind as well. All right, so as we dive into the topic that is very close to top of mind around the election, I'll share my own reflection before turning it over to Rob, that my thought was very much that the several days pause that we all experienced between Election Day and when the media called the race for Joe Biden was very important. It really reminded us that regardless of whom you voted for, half the country has a very different view, and there is a lot of work to be done to move forward as a nation. I felt that if the results had been clear on election night, decisive one way or another, it would have been all too easy for us to kind of blow by that moment of really realizing that millions of Americans are in pain across the country and on all sides of the political spectrum. So there's a lot of work to be done to respond. So we'll turn to our session, and what we've got two parts to this conversation about the election. The first part is to go into small groups, and we're going to ask you to reflect on what the election means to you personally. That we think about this as our connecting question, which is also a chance to introduce ourselves to the others in the group and to catch up a little bit. But that'll be the connecting question, is what does the election mean to you personally? The second part, when we come back from that, will be a whole group conversation reflecting on the implications of the election for Convergence. And Rob will moderate that conversation with our board members, Lindsay Tirico and Stuart Butler. So before diving into the small groups, we're going to do one more poll as a pulse check to see where folks are. And we'd ask you this question: which of the following statements comes the closest to your perspective about divisiveness and cohesion post-election? Would you say you are disappointed and surprised, disappointed and not surprised, pleased and surprised, or pleased and not surprised? So that poll should be up now. Great, I think we've got a clear winner. Why don't we end that, Doozy? I'm disappointed and not surprised. I think that's probably how most of us are feeling. So thank you for sharing that. To get the discussion flowing, we're going to break you up into small groups of 4 or 5. And again, the question that we'll ask you is, how are you processing the election results from a personal perspective? Or more broadly, how are you relating to this moment? We'll give you about 15 minutes. Please do let everyone in the group have a chance to speak, and we'll see you back here in a few. Welcome back, everybody. It was in one very rich conversation, actually 1.5, since there's a lot of discussion going on. So thank you so much thank you for sharing how you're feeling at the moment about how the election has affected you. So we're going to turn now to a discussion of what the election means for Convergence's work. And when we do that, please feel free to chat your thoughts and comments and questions for our discussants in the chat function. We'll get to as many of those as we possibly can. So before handing it over to Rob, let me just first acknowledge how wonderful our recent celebration of Rob was, and a huge thank you to many of you that are on the Zoom meeting today who joined that celebration. Okay, Rob Firsch, Lindsay Tirico, and Stuart Butler, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Amanda. And hello, everyone. It's just great to see so many people here. It means the world to the organization to have so many people interested in our work. And we have a great agenda. I want to acknowledge the role of David, Amanda, Doozy, the whole team putting this together. I think it's going to be a great day and a really important day. I really do appreciate the toast that occurred like 5 weeks ago. But now that I am toast, I am ready to take on other duties on behalf of Convergence. And we have a panel. We're going to try to be very brief with some remarks to tee up things, and be watching the chat room for questions from you all. And people are going to communicate with me, and everyone knows my technological prowess at handling these kinds of items. But on the panel, and just in case everyone doesn't know them, are Stuart Butler, who is now a senior fellow at Brookings, formerly spent 35 years at the Heritage Foundation, virtually an original board member, and also a visiting fellow with Convergence, who's helped do so much to create so many of our projects and participate in them. And Lindsay Tirico, a more recent add to the board, is a phenomenal addition. She's the Director of Policy and Advocacy for United Way Worldwide. And she also is very versatile. She chairs our Fund Development Committee. So Lindsay will be taking contributions as the day progresses. So let me start it out with this general question for the two of them, and I'll add my own thoughts afterward. Lindsay and Stuart, in that order, what gives you pause and what gives you hope in this post-election period in terms of its implications for Convergence?
So I'll jump in, and thank you so much, Rob, and hello, everyone. I want to first acknowledge that this is a moment of tremendous uncertainty and anxiety for many of us. And as we discussed in our breakout session, I think just the last week alone has been a roller coaster ride of emotions, whatever your political affiliation might be. I think at a high level, I'm hopeful that despite the fact that there will be lawsuits and recounts and more uncertainty to come, that our democracy is at work, and it's tried and true, and our institutions have always held, and they will hold again. So I'm optimistic about the days ahead, although like many of you have trepidation about it. I think however you feel about this election, I would encourage us to think about two things. One is the increase in voter participation and turnout. I think I saw today that more people voted in this election than over a century. So just tremendous engagement at the local level. And the second thing is that the pandemic forced us as a country to adapt new ways of voting, to provide people with voting options, early voting, vote by mail, that invites more people into the democratic process. I think we had 100 million ballots cast before the election started. And so that's really tremendous and good news for the country and good news for our democracy. I think the implications for policy and advocacy, which we'll get into more, are that we will have a divided government. But I think to me, the bigger issue is that our communities are divided. And that clearly, as Amanda and others have said, there's even more division than we anticipated. So I think for me, there's four key roles that nonprofits like Convergence should be playing right now, stepping up and filling in some of these gaps. And the first one is to first take care of your staff. I think as nonprofits, we need to put people first, and that starts with our own staff and giving our staff space and grace and opportunities for dialogue, within our organizations, providing mental health and support services, and just being respectful and having empathy that people may be struggling right now. And so doing the day-to-day work is not necessarily going to be top of mind for them. And that we can't also put everybody in the same category and assume that everybody has a certain, perception about what this election means. And so I think it starts with our staff. The second thing I would encourage Convergence and other organizations to do is to reaffirm your commitment to bringing communities together and your opposition to hate and division and violence. So I would encourage, organizations like Convergence to put out statements, op-eds, to talk externally about your commitment to this work and what that looks like. And then third, I would say to look for opportunities to bridge divides through dialogue. And that might be through community conversations or through fostering dialogues between, I've seen some organizations bring a Republican and a Democrat member of Congress together on a call, on a virtual meeting, and model what civility looks like. And then finally, I would say that Convergence should focus on policy and not politics. Our policy work does not change. Our mission does not change, but the tactics and the ways that we go about, the strategies that we go about accomplishing it, and who we work with may look different. But at the end of the day, we're focused on the issues that are really going to solve the problems in communities, and that work should not change in any way. So those are a couple of thoughts about what this means for Convergence. And I'm hopeful that you all will lean into this moment and really step up to show what leadership looks like.
Great. Thank you, Lindsay. Stuart, your thoughts?
Yes, well, thank you. And thank you, Rob. And thanks to all of you for taking part in this LC. It's extremely important to have this kind of input and to have these kinds of conversations, I think, particularly at this time. Let me begin by just saying, I mean, what does give me pause? The election certainly did give me pause and does give me pause. I think what I'm most alarmed about is actually what seems to have happened or happening is that we've become two very different societies in America, two different populations, almost two different countries. And the utter contempt that is felt by many people in one sort of party or one group for those in the others, both contempt and just inability to even fathom how other people can come to a different conclusion. That really does give me pause because it's a very deep issue, and it's not just happened in the last 4 years. If you look at studies from the Pew Foundation and elsewhere, we've seen this gradual divide, not just in polarization, but the feeling that the other people in the other group somehow are, maybe un-American, or you just cannot understand them. I think it's going to take a very long time to deal with that. I also think that, whilst I agree with Lindsay that we have powerful institutions in this country to help us to continue to keep on track and to uphold the rights of people. That said, I think we do have less trust today in many institutions, from the media to the military, certainly to the court system, that I'm not so sure that Americans really trust the institutions in a way that are going to be necessary. So, I have a lot of gloom in that sense of thinking about the election, but I also have a lot of hope. I am a historian, and so I can look back, and we've been through very dangerous times before and uncertain times before. In the breakout, the election of 1800 was mentioned, and that makes this election look like a walk in the park, I think, by comparison. Some of the things that were said and some of the things that were done between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson and their supporters. So it's not new in that sense. So I think that gives us a lot of hope. And I want to just take a few minutes to say, when we think as an organization of Convergence about how we do move ideas forward, move better understanding forward, I think it is important to think about the nature of the Congress and the nature of our kind of political institutions. Divided government is quite normal. Divided government with a lot of ill feeling is pretty common in our history. And I think within that, it's important to bear in mind at least 3 things, maybe 4 things. One is that most legislation in this country is bipartisan. If you actually go and look, even in the last 4 years, the majority of major legislation was actually bipartisan. And let's not forget that. We may be having a court case, a Supreme Court case over the Affordable Care Act, but we had major legislation on mental health in lots of other areas, going almost under the radar. So I think it's important, first of all, to be hopeful that the process of getting bipartisan solutions is actually still alive and well in our process. You wouldn't understand that looking at the television, but if you actually get involved, you would see that. Secondly, it's important, I think, to understand and to remember that leaders arise in different situations. People come out of the woodwork, as it were, in these areas. We've seen this over and over again. We have one of them talking to us very shortly, Derek Kilmer, a great example of a backbench member gradually kind of making a huge difference and bringing people together. And there are many people like that. So I think one of the things we need to do, all of us, as well as Convergence, is look for those leaders and potential leaders, the people who could really make it their moment. I think, and I think thirdly, just in similar fashion, it's important to know, to remember that amid all the anger and the polarization that we are aware of in the political system and in Congress in particular, underneath that, there's always been, and there always is, a lot of collaboration between members and conversations going on. We see organizations, ad hoc groups, and so on developing within the Congress all the time, and that's been true in the last 4 years as well. Groups like Problem Solvers, the bipartisan working group that Convergence is very actively involved in. These are all people under the radar on both sides of the aisle, constantly talking and building trust and moving ideas forward. And many of those ideas then trickle upwards to the leadership. So I think it's important to understand that and to have some confidence that we can move forward in that environment. And then last but by no means least, when you look at the incoming president, presidents can be very effective at reaching beyond the narrow partisan constraints that they are often under to speak directly to people and to build different alliances, if you like, and different moods in the country. Ronald Reagan did that spectacularly well. So did Bill Clinton. I would say, quite frankly, and some may disagree with me, that I don't think Barack Obama was quite as good at doing that in terms of reaching really beyond, but one can argue about that. But the fact is that they do exist. And Donald Trump certainly was not one of those, but Joe Biden is. And his whole history speaks in that way. And I think that's going to be a very important part of this discussion in the future. So, you know, yes, one should look at the election in Georgia, the 2 Senate seats that are coming up and so on, but whatever happens there, I think what I've just said, and I think the role that a president can play can help significantly prepare the ground for a real discussion, a real conversation. That makes our job at Convergence both helping that to happen, drawing attention to that opportunity, doing what we can do to get people in the room doing the same kind of thing. But it also means that the issues that we look at and the way we can move things forward, we can do it within an environment where actually there's a lot more possibility than may seem to be the case when you just simply look at the raw numbers and the noise associated with the political system.
Great. Thank you both, Lindsay and Stuart. And I'm going to balance my role as moderator with limited time. Just to say, I agree, obviously, with so much of what both of you said. I do agree that divisions run deep. And unfortunately, the incentives in Congress and some of the current leadership in Congress may not lead us to the kind of cooperation we need, but that's where we become very important. We and other groups who rally, let's say the public, and the public is often more united when they're polled and talked to than politicians see. And if we're also continuing to work with leading stakeholder groups who normally drive division and have them come together and form the relationships we've been successful doing, I think there's huge opportunities for us. I too think that Derek Kilmer's leadership has been extraordinary, and what he's done in the Select Committee on Modernization, you'll hear about that, is remarkable, bipartisan basis, operating differently than other norms. And I want to associate myself, especially with what Stuart said. I do think, I'm hoping that President Biden, who I was on the staff of the Senate Budget Committee in 1979, and he was like 36 years old, and he was actually quite a personality there. I got to see him firsthand a long time ago. I'm hoping he will create a groundswell that he won't rely only upon his own good intentions. He will need to engage all of us in the field of building bridges. And I hope that he will inspire citizens throughout the country to get involved in new ways. New organizations are springing up. I hope philanthropy will follow him, just as they followed other presidents who started initiatives and began to create a groundswell in funding and attention for things he cared about. And the more attention that can be brought to the successes of the many groups already existing, I think can inspire citizens to go to another level. I don't think most people in the country really want to be hating each other the way they do. And I think they're going to be looking for new pathways they don't expect to get out of that. So there's going to be a lot more about this through the rest of the session. We got a question was forwarded. I'm going to move to a question that came in from the audience that which is sort of, I think, two comments. How do we move forward now with so little trust in our institutions? And are Adams and Jefferson a good example of building relationships of trust? It's someone else put into the text, I think Mark Zitter, that even though they were deeply divided and angry, they eventually corresponded, became very good friends. I wonder if either of you would like to comment on this issue. How do we restore trust? How do we move forward when there's so little trust in our institutions?
I would just say quickly that, I think we have a role to play in trying to build that trust and confidence. And people are going to be looking to institutions for, to say, how are institutions doing? And I think we have to exude confidence in our systems, no matter what. I also think that we have to be the adult in the room, because there's going to be this gap, as Stuart said, where people aren't going to trust institutions. And so where else are they going to look? They're not going to trust the media, for sure. If anything, I think the media has become less trustworthy in reporting the results. They're not going to trust government. So it's really nonprofits that are the place where people are most likely to look for guidance and to be that trusted player in communities. And so I think we have to step up and show that we are making efforts to bring communities together, that we are nonpartisan organizations, that we don't have a political agenda, that at the end of the day, we would just want to make sure that our communities are strong and healthy and resilient and equitable, and focus on the issues and focus on the process and not the politics. So, those are kind of the overarching themes that I think we should be focused on.
Tremendously helpful. I think we're down about 90 seconds. Stuart.
I'll just say very quickly then that I think it's really important who heads institutions, who is appointed. I think it would be much wiser for President Biden to focus on picking people to head key agencies and key departments that really can build public trust within them. I think the policy side will flow from that. Policy advances, I think that's going to be really important. So the next Attorney General and so on is going to be really important, who exactly that is. And the same with a lot of other departments. So that's, people matter in building up institutions, just as they matter in tearing them down.
Thank you for that, Stuart. I agree with that. I do think 4 years of respecting the institutions could go a long way. I'll just add one concluding thought. We'd hoped to get to a question on race. I'm sorry we didn't get to that. But just my own thought about this. I totally believe George W. Bush said he was a uniter, not a divider, that he meant that. And when Barack Obama said we're the United States, we're not blue and red states, and he meant that. But it's going to take another level of understanding, I think, by President Biden and those around him and everywhere else to engage people with different points of view at another level. And I would say that we are a good model for that. We try purposely to get as wide a difference as we can into a room. And as we look at restoring institutions, Lindsay and Stuart and everyone else, I'm not suggesting President Biden should bring, President-elect Biden should be bringing in people who are not going to follow his agenda, but he needs to create ways to which voices that are not part of the Democratic establishment get heard. and ways to bring people to the table, and potentially to have even appointments that allow him to do what Lincoln did and make sure that he's got some people who disagree with him. I think there'll be no genuine healing unless there's a really deep and meaningful engagement, not still efforts of one side to convince the other that they're right, but they're being polite to bring him into the conversation. And with that, I think we're out of time. I apologize if we couldn't get to everything we needed to get to. I see this active chat going on.
I do want to just call. I know that Rob, you filled your job in getting us through this in time, but I'm not sure, especially looking out at who we have here, that we can afford not to have at least one or two more thoughts about race. It's too important for us, and it's a space where I think we as Convergence and our entire field have so much to reflect on. So
terrific.
Maybe
so
just another moment or two on that.
Great. Thank you, David. Didn't know I had leave to do that. So terrific. So let me just pose this. Events this year and the election itself have brought race and racial justice to the center of public attention in powerful new ways. How might this affect how Convergence goes about its work?
Well, thank you, David, for giving us a few minutes to talk about this, because I agree it's too important to sort of miss this important piece. You know, I was on a troubling phone call with some nonprofit CEOs and leaders earlier this week, and there was a conversation about how the election outcome illustrated that the sector needs to rethink our shift to center our work on racial equity. And the fact that there are now more Trump voters than many of us expected, that maybe we made a bad bet by doubling down on racial equity. Maybe, you know, this wasn't the focus we were supposed to, isn't where we were supposed to focus. And so we need to rethink and reimagine our focus on equity. And I think that is exactly the wrong conclusion to make from this election. I think that if anything, it spotlights how deep and entrenched the racial tensions and divisions are in our country. And by backing away from that, we're never going to be able to address those issues. And so I really do think that we need to continue the course, and Convergence needs to continue their commitment to doing racial equity. I think at the same time, it means that we cannot discount and undervalue the perspective of Trump voters. And we need to be able to do both. And I think Convergence is really well suited to be able to do both, because there's a lot of center-left nonprofits that talk about bridging communities together. But when you look at the work that they're doing, it is very much, it is very they're taking a very partisan approach. They are leaving out a large segment of the population. And so I think Convergence is well positioned to be able to talk about equity and at the same time listen, have authentic conversations with people across the aisle and make sure that they are part of those conversations and genuinely trying to bring people together.
Great. Stuart?
Yeah, I mean, amen to what Lindsay just said. And I triple underscore that. I think when you look specifically at what we might do, I think there are kind of three tracks that we might think about at Convergence. One is there are certainly many issues that we contemplate looking at that have a very important race dimension in the sense of either the impact of the issue or the dynamics of it. That was true with economic mobility when we looked at this, at the workplace. It's true with healthcare. It's true with a lot of other areas. So I think we need to consciously look at issues that really speak to some of these racial dynamics in this area. I think secondly, it's really important, and we try to do this, and we've obviously got to do it better than we have been, to have the lived experience of people of different racial backgrounds and different experiences associated with that at the table. It's not that we ignore that. It's hard to do. It's really hard to get to reach out and do it effectively. But I think we've got to think very much more about how to do that. And then I'd say thirdly, we need to, in a variety of ways, I think, to help start to move forward on some very charged, racially charged issues and figure out how to do that more effectively. One of them would be the police, for example. At the same time as we see defunding the police and all and very legitimate issues like that, we're also seeing mass resignations from police around this country. I mean, people have just given up and said, I hate being just, considered to be racist and so forth in everything that I do, and hated. This is what many police are saying. So I think it's really important for us to try to tackle those issues head on. How we do it may be different from what we've done up to now, but I think it's really important for us to, to figure out better ways of dealing with these very racially charged questions and not to ignore them.
Thank you, Stuart and Lindsay. I agree completely with what you put out. Let me just make one last observation and turn it back to Amanda, which is this. When I just wear a Convergence hat, you've got millions of people in the Black Lives Matter movement and those who sympathize with it, and people who voted for President Trump are feeling unheard, unlistened to, not understood. It's not an either or choice. Our job is to get them talking and listening to each other and to bring out those voices and to make up for historic injustices that certainly have come out powerfully over the last year, while at the same time trying to head off what appears to be a very, very sort of newer round of frustration amongst other Americans. And it shouldn't be a choice between them. We have to find the both and solutions. So with that, my typical punting of not taking one side or another, let me turn it back to Amanda. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. And thank you, Lindsay and Stuart. What an amazing conversation, and just so profound, the issues that were raised and the work we have to do. So thank you for teeing that up. I want to welcome those who have joined us since we started. I know some new people have joined us, and in particular, Congressman Kilmer. It's great to have you with us. Thank you for joining. And we will turn to the award in just a few minutes. Let me shift gears now to our program report. We're experimenting a little bit with an approach with the Leadership Council that's similar to an approach we're taking with the board, which is to do more reporting by paper and allow more time for discussion during the meeting. So you received some pre-reads before today, which really lay out in detail what's happening with our program and our project work. But that said, projects have been the core of our bridge building work, and David and the program team will take just a little time for you to hear some important highlights of that work. So we have about 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes for that discussion. Please feel free to keep chatting questions. There's a very rich conversation dialogue going on in the chat, which is just a wonderful supplement to the screen. So thank you. David.
Thanks so much, Amanda. I know that we've got too little time here to be doing our program report, so I'm going to turn it over quickly to Russell and to Vicki to talk about three programs: the guns and suicide prevention, economic recovery for America's workers, and the California Health Reform Initiative, as well as give you a little bit of color on how our pipeline for next programs is shaping up. And I'll just editorialize that I think Russell and Vicki are scoring really remarkably well in an incredibly difficult environment, switching from meetings in person to virtually, and dealing with very rough issues in every case driving toward impact. So Russell, do you want to give us some quick highlights on the two projects, and then turn it directly over to Vicki?
Great. Good to see everybody, friends old and new, on the call today. So yeah, quick highlights here. I just want everyone to know, first of all, that the work goes on. David is right. It's a challenge right now. There are absolutely barriers to bridge building in an all virtual world, but there are also opportunities, and we're fully taking advantage of those. We're able to democratize who can participate to some extent. We're able to meet a little bit more frequently. So there are some good things, and we don't have hallway conversations. There are some challenges, right? It's harder to read body language. So I just want to overly simplify, but let you know there's some hard stuff and a lot of good stuff happening. And we've been really grateful to have the good faith engagement of our stakeholders during this once a century crisis we're all living through. I want to thank Erica Loken, Omar El Khatib, and our amazing intern Cherie Simpson, who are on the programmatic team that I lead. Really appreciate all the work that you do. You're not going to hear as much about the Hill work specifically because we're going to hear directly from the congressman, which is great, but Omar's been leading that, and Erica is my partner in this project work. Really quickly, we have two active projects. One is on how can we make sure that America's workers, especially low and moderate income families, can recover and bounce back from the economic fallout of the pandemic. To address that, we have pulled forward part of the Working Up Dialogue group that finished its work a couple of years ago, focused on economic mobility. We've added some new voices to that group, and we've been informally meeting with them in a bit of an experiment for Convergence. The charge has not been a whole new set of consensus recommendations. The charge has been intel sharing. We've connected right and left-leaning policy thinkers who did not have a relationship at all before these meetings occurred. And the other goal has been issue spotting. Where could this group that Convergence might lead into next year as the new administration takes over? Where could we go deeper? Where could we lead some work? Here are the key threads they have identified for us that Convergence is going to be leaning into and making a decision over the next couple of months of what we'll tackle. Number one is race and equity. Everybody in the group, right, left, and center, business, nonprofit, geographic areas have all named closing racial gaps is critical. It was critical before the pandemic. And we've seen laid bare the fact that the economic fallout is hitting people of color harder, it's hitting women harder, and it's hitting low and moderate income families harder. They're going to have the hardest time reattaching and the least financial ability to bridge through the crisis. The fact that we're facing a need for more fiscal stimulus in the view of this group, but it might not be forthcoming, or it might not be forthcoming until next year, is a real concern. So race and equity is one that they flagged. Caregiving, and especially childcare, is another one the group has named as something that we will not get on track with the recovery until we bolster that sector and help parents with young kids who can't juggle work and care at the same time. And then lastly, how do we reconnect those to jobs that face the biggest barriers? People that don't have good digital access, people that need to reskill during the pandemic for a new type of a job. There's a lot of interest and concern around that among our business stakeholders. So I just want to let you know that work goes on. We should know in the next couple of months where we'll be going deeper in 2021. Race and equity is right at the center of it. The second project I'm going to quickly let you have an update on is connected to firearms. And again, I want to say, even in the middle of this tough environment where you just heard Lindsay and Stuart talk about the divides, they're very, very real. We have a group that's meeting that includes gun violence prevention advocates and gun rights activists who have never had meaningful conversations before. And they're meeting with us at Convergence under the banner of trying to prevent firearm suicide, is the piece that we have broken off to start with, for two reasons. One, that is the largest number of gun deaths in America by far. The mass shootings in those events get a lot of attention, and they're tragic, and we have to rein them in as well. But many more people die by firearm suicide than other methods. And secondly, there's a huge urgency around the pandemic because social and economic isolation is being exacerbated through what's going on throughout the country. And so the risk factors for suicide ideation and attempts is going up. And so that group has just begun meeting. We just had our third dialogue meeting yesterday. I wish I had more time to tell you more about it. It was a fantastic, rich, and vulnerable and hard discussion that we got into fear and race and how people are perceived if they have guns. We got into risk factors for veterans, for African-American youth with regard to firearm suicide. So more to come as that project continues. These early stages are promising. We still have miles and miles to go, to be very clear, but the early work is promising that there is some common ground to be found on that really critical issue. With that, let me hand it to Vicki for more updates.
All right, thank you, Russell. And in the interest of time, I'll jump right into the California Health Reform Initiative, where I have been well assisted by Don Collier, our program associate, and Jen Fry, our current intern. And the great news is that we hit a major milestone this very week. Throughout this project, the profound importance of fixing our healthcare system, especially in this moment, has become really clear. Healthcare is critical to every single one of us, of every race, gender, geography, no matter whether you are rich or poor, yet it keeps getting more expensive. So in this challenging moment, with COVID raging at unprecedented levels, healthcare costs continue to increase at a pace far faster than inflation. In the last 15 years in California, healthcare premiums have not only risen faster than inflation, they have risen 5 times faster. That means non-discretionary healthcare is taking more and more out of families' budgets. right at a time in this pandemic when they can least afford it and most need it. So in March, as you know, our stakeholders released their report recommending a way for California to contain those costs. In short, they want the state government to set up an entity that will set cost targets, limiting how much health plans and providers can increase their revenue. It'll also help health plans and providers achieve those targets and set penalties if they do not. There's one small correction. Our memo says that they recommended this be done in the governor's office. That's not quite right, and there's an interesting story about it. Our group had centered on a Massachusetts-style independent commission, but when they began to hear that the governor was contemplating proposing an Office of Healthcare Affordability in his administration, the group made the decision not to get into that political fight. And thus, we have the very awkward title, a new California government entity to address healthcare costs and affordability. But, so that is obviously designed to cover both the independent commission and an office in his administration. So then, in a strange irony, it was a health crisis that stalled our progress. So just as the governor and the legislature were looking toward enacting this proposal, the state budget was cut deeply by COVID, and this bill was deferred. But the quarantine on our recommendation is lifting, and there are 3 exciting advances. 1, 2 weeks ago, the State Assembly held a special hearing on affordability, and one of our stakeholders and others testified about having an Office of Healthcare Affordability. 2, the Health Committee chair announced that he will introduce the bill next session, which is a very big deal. We didn't know if he would. And 3rd, Assemblymember Mark Berman here in Palo Alto hosted a webinar for us on Monday where, we had released the report, but that was the first time this week when our stakeholders had a chance to discuss publicly why they thought this was a great idea. We had over 200 people sign up and over 100 people attend to listen. And our stakeholders did a fabulous job of passionately explaining why their recommendation is even more relevant today under this pandemic. So going forward, we're considering partnering with others in other parts of the state and explaining this recommendation further as things unfold in the state legislature. So let me turn quickly to the pipeline. On page 4 of your program update document, you can see a summary of the pipeline for new projects. I only have time to highlight one. So I want to talk about digital disinformation and why we are very excited about it in this unique moment. So disinformation, especially in political campaigns, election tampering, and voter intimidation or suppression, is not new. What is new is that the tools of technology and social media, including those of Twitter, Facebook, and Google, allow disinformation to spread like wildfire. The impact on our democracy is dramatic. For example, just yesterday, the New York Times launched an election results disinformation tracker. Who could have conceived of that a few years ago? So, some argue that tech firms must do more to rein in disinformation on their platforms as a matter of corporate social responsibility. A few months ago, Twitter announced new measures to tackle disinformation, and Facebook said it would remove posts that encouraged people to monitor polling places. But others argue that tech self-regulation, while helpful, can only go so far, and we should hold tech firms accountable for ensuring that their platforms are not misused to undermine our democracy. But tech platforms are concerned about the perception of political bias and the competing principle of free speech. And tech companies didn't set out to be content or media gatekeepers. They were conceived as content neutral public forums. So it really boils down to trust, the very thing that Convergence was founded upon, building trust. The erosion of trust in previously trusted sources, and even in the truth itself, as we've discussed today, is dangerous. Fortunately, there is a growing bipartisan consensus that more must be done to manage those issues. So we are exploring that, even as the ground is moving beneath our feet. So David, that's the update.
Thanks so much. Boy, I feel terrible interrupting or cutting this short. I know that we always engage our Leadership Council a lot in our programs, and I do hope that you read the reports that we provided. I want to transition now to something that Rob mentioned earlier on. We're so grateful to be joined by Congressman Derek Kilmer, who represents the 6th District of Washington as a Democrat in the House of Representatives. And he also represents in Congress and beyond, as I hope you picked up from Rob, so much more than that. The chairman of the House Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress, Congressman Kilmer, and his co-chair, Congressman Graves, recently published a groundbreaking report that listed over 90 recommendations to help Congress better serve the American people. It's really a pathway for Congress to model the kind of effective leadership that Americans crave. And core to those recommendations were 16 separate proposals for how Congress could collaborate more effectively in a cross-partisan way. I'll let Congressman Kilmer share how unusual it is for a select committee to accomplish this kind of work. What's truly remarkable that to please keep in mind is that Representative Kilmer and his co-chair of the select committee fully walked the talk during this entire session of Congress. The select committee has a makeup of 6 Democrats and 6 Republicans. All the work is fully bipartisan. Even the committee seating alternates so that Republicans are sitting next to Democrats. And think of this, every one of these 90 recommendations received unanimous support on the committee. And Congressman, I hope you correct me if I got that wrong. Representative Kilmer has brought this mindset to his work on the Joint Select Committee on the Budget and Appropriations Process Reform, and also currently and on an ongoing basis as chairman of the Bipartisan Working Group in the House. Representative Kilmer is bringing extraordinary additional energy to the work of building bridges across these challenging partisan divides. So Congressman Kilmer, for all that you've done to bring together members of Congress who are fractured and divided, and for all the work you're continuing to take on in healing divides in Congress, on behalf of the Convergence Board, our Leadership Council, and staff, I'm proud to present you with the Convergence 2020 Award for Extraordinary Leadership in Bridge Building. And thank you for this extraordinary work. I would love to invite folks to be putting questions in the chat for Congressman Kilmer for our discussion. And while folks are formulating questions, let me start off, Congressman, by asking you, what do you think you would most like people on this call to remember about your work in Congress, and especially about your work on the Select Committee?
Well, first off, David, let me thank you and the Convergence team, not just for the recognition, but for the platform to share some of the committee's work. I'm going to apologize in advance. My Wi-Fi shut down, so I'm using my phone as a hotspot. So I hope I'm not too glitchy. Listen, one of the things I'm most proud of on our committee is the partnership I had with Vice Chair Graves, and to your point, the partnership we had with every member of our committee over the last 22 months. We knew that if we wanted to make real change in Congress, that we had to be unified, and so we decided up front to do things a bit differently. We said we would have one nonpartisan staff with one budget, one office, no red jerseys, no blue jerseys, just fixed Congress jerseys. And, that's a different way of doing things. And candidly, that means everybody has to give a little. As a member of the majority party, that means I gave up the capacity to just roll over the minority. But they gave up something too, and that is they gave up the ability to just vote no. And, all of our member meetings were done as a full committee. We had staff briefings that were done on a nonpartisan basis. And listen, not everybody agrees on everything all the time, but we worked really hard to build recommendations. We got near 100 recommendations, all of which were bipartisan. And I think we made a number of recommendations aimed at improving the way Congress does business, and that congressional committees do their business, doing things like having a bipartisan retreat as a committee to define what does success look like for our members, doing pre-hearing committee meetings for bipartisan discussion to happen, having, as you mentioned, mixing up even doing things like mixing up the seating, having bipartisan staff, and I think those are a really good start for hopefully building some trust and encouraging more bipartisan work in the People's House. I'll also just add, Secretary Gardner under LBJ gave a graduation speech, and he talked about the importance of being a loving critic, that, that you cannot be an uncritical lover who, just shields institutions from the criticism that's required to improve. And on the other hand, you can't be a critic without love that's just focused on treating the institution like the piñata at the party. And I think what I have the greatest gratitude for and pride in the committee's work is that you had Democrats and Republicans saying, we recognize with a critical eye that there's improvements that need to be made, but we do it, with a heart towards service. And you had 12 members of the committee who acted like loving critics.
Thanks, Congressman. We've got some questions that are emerging in the chat. David Fairman is asking, what do you think is the likelihood, and what might it take for us to see more work across the aisle on issues, especially where there may be broad-based public support, like infrastructure, COVID funding, and other issues? Does it seem to you like that's something that can get done?
I think so, and I certainly hope so. And there are forces outside the dome that can make that challenging. Our politics don't necessarily always reward compromise and collaboration, even though I think generally the American people want stuff to work better. And so I think collaboration and compromise are important and should not be dirty words. There are forces inside the dome that also can make that challenging. And I can't say enough positive about the role that Convergence plays. I mentioned our committee did a bipartisan retreat. I think there's a real opportunity there, frankly, for organizations like Convergence and many of the groups involved with Convergence, to foster that type of approach to consensus building. Which again is not to suggest that Democrats and Republicans are going to agree on everything. They're not going to, and the founders didn't intend for us to agree on everything. But to your point, I think what exhausts the American people is that too often Congress can't even make progress on the issues on which there is agreement. Infrastructure is a terrific example of that. And you mentioned in my introduction, I co-chair the bipartisan working group. With the help of Convergence and a lot of outside groups, we actually sent a letter to House leadership laying out, here's what we think a bipartisan infrastructure package could look like.
It's terrific. So you mentioned the differences that members bring to this. It makes me wonder, as Eric Olson asked, whether do you think that members actually know and appreciate the differences in their views that they bring to a conversation, or do you think that they only sort of keep in mind what they're trying to get done?
That's complicated in that, listen, I think every member comes with an agenda, and, and at the same time, particularly in an era of divided government, there needs to be an appreciation for not just what you want to get, but what those with whom you are collaborating need to get too. One of the most constructive experiences I've had in Congress was actually doing a couple of bipartisan exchanges, one that was organized by the Bipartisan Policy Center. And I went to Arkansas and spent a few days with Steve Womack, who's a pretty conservative Republican. And he came out to my district for a couple of days. And, and I think part of the way we better get a better understanding of where people are coming from is to actually understand where people are coming from. I took him up Hurricane Ridge in Olympic National Park, which is beautiful, and I hope you all visit and spend lots of money in my district. But, we got to the top of that mountain. He got an update from the National Park Service, and on the way down the mountain, he said, "Kilmer, now I understand why you keep hammering away about the maintenance backlog in the national park system." We went to the Port of Tacoma, and they just did a bang-up job of saying, here's issues around freight mobility, but they also said, here's how many containers come from our port and end up in Arkansas. And here's how many containers originate in Arkansas, go through our port, and end up in the rest of the world. And when we drove away from there, he said, "Kilmer, all of a sudden I care about freight mobility issues in the, in the Puget Sound region, and so some of it is actually trying to have those types of discussions, I think are really important. So it's not just about your agenda, but trying to understand what other folks need for their constituents too.
Thank you. You talked about the loving, I can't remember what you said, the loving
critic.
Loving critic. Does that feel realistic to you in terms of it's clearly a great direction to be going? Is that really an endpoint that you think a place like Congress could manifest, or does that just keep being something that we sort of keep on our mind as folks move forward?
Here's why I mention it. There are folks who are very content with the status quo and who don't sufficiently look at Congress with a critical eye in answering the question, how do we make this work better for the American people? I mean, listen, I am very conscious of the fact that I'm part of an institution that, according to recent polling, is less popular than head lice, colonoscopies, and the rock band Nickelback. And, and it's earned those low approval ratings. And so I am not content with the status quo. At the same time, we also see a lot of people who recognize that one of the most popular things you can do is just bash the institution. And the upshot of that institution bashing and that self-flagellation is, unfortunately, as an institution, we've really eroded the capacity of the institution to solve problems for the American people. So when our committee got together in a bipartisan retreat up front, we basically went around the room and said, well, what did you expect out of this institution? How has it met your expectations? And where has it come up short? And, no one joins Congress because they despise the institution. They join it because they think they can get something done for their constituents. And so a lot of our discussion as a committee, and you see it in the recommendations that we made. We made recommendations that were oriented trying to restore some of the capacity of the institution to solve problems for the American people. Some of those are tough, right? I mean, suggesting that the institution invests in itself and invests in its staff, that's not necessarily a popular concept, but the reality is, if you want decisions made by your elected representatives and their talented staff, that means they need to be able to hang on to talented staff and not just have a median tenure of 2 years, and the consequence of that is that the executive branch and K Street have an oversized role. So at some point, there is a consequence that's worse than not investing in the institution. So a lot of the recommendations we made were with the eyes of a loving critic.
That makes a lot of sense. We're several of the questions that I'm seeing talk about a discussion that we've just had earlier around how we're perceiving the election, which was so unbelievably close, and the turnout was extraordinary. President Trump received the largest number of votes of any presidential candidate, second to the number of votes that Biden received. So, and it does seem, we heard earlier, that folks can't quite fathom the perspective of the people on the other side. Do you have a sense for how we in the nonprofit sector and in the bridge building sector can be helpful in this moment? Do you feel that there's a pathway for bridging that at a public level?
Yeah, I actually think the work you do is really important in that regard. You're right. We saw a record number of folks make their voices heard in this election. And having said that, you're also right that there's a whole lot of people that don't understand the perspective of folks who might have voted for a different candidate. Sometimes when my staff doesn't know what to do with me, they send me to go stand on people's porches, not during a global pandemic, but I remember in 2017 knocking on doors in a neighborhood in the north end of Tacoma. It was not a campaign year. I was not soliciting votes. I was standing on people's porches saying, "Hey, I'm Derek Kilmer. I'm your congressman. What's on your mind?" And I had a guy say to me, "Do you know anyone who voted for Donald Trump?" And I said, "Yeah, 3 of the 6 counties I represent voted for Donald Trump. I know a lot of someones who voted for Donald Trump." And he said, "You know what? I don't know anybody who voted for Donald Trump." He said, "It struck me," he said, "It strikes me that's kind of a problem because I don't even understand how they think." He said, "I went on my social media page and said, I'd love to have coffee with a Trump voter." And he said, "And all my Democratic friends called me a traitor and a bunch of people I didn't know called me a snowflake." And he said, "So how do I actually understand the perspectives of people who disagree with me on stuff?" And I hopped on early to this Zoom and heard about some of the work that Convergence is doing to get people who have divergent perspectives on an issue to sit down with each other, sometimes for the first time, and understand that. So don't sleep on the importance of that. I actually think that is a really big deal. I also think too often folks don't see bipartisanship in action. It's not leading cable news, and any effort to elevate, good action, right? When people are actually doing that hard work of trying to build bridges, and like I chair the New Dem coalition, it's, sort of a pragmatic group of pro-growth Democrats. We're generally not on national TV shouting and yelling at one another, and sometimes that means we don't really get much coverage. And, we're actually trying to find policies that can get across the finish line. That's not always the most glamorous work. I consistently joke that if the New Dems held a rally on the steps of the Capitol, I would be yelling, "What do we want?" And everyone would yell, "A comprehensive approach to job creation that includes infrastructure investment, workforce development, and a smarter approach to taxes and trade." And then I'd go, "When do we want it?" And everyone would go, "We're willing to work in a collaborative way to bring people," like no one's covering that rally. And, so to the extent that we all of us, I count myself among them, can elevate efforts to build those bridges and amplify that, that's important. Look, the work of the Select Committee has been an absolutely tremendous example of how Democrats and Republicans are actually working together. But because we're getting things done and working in a collaborative manner, it gets covered by C-SPAN Ocho, like it's, it's not on CNN or MSNBC. Sometimes we barely make the C-SPAN cut, and there's other work going on in that regard too. You mentioned the bipartisan working group, and I'm very grateful for the collaboration and support of Convergence in the work of the bipartisan working group. But that's a group of a dozen Democrats and a dozen Republicans who meet for breakfast each week. It's a meeting in 3 parts. First part, we go around the room, and anyone who's working on something where they want to invite collaboration or co-sponsorship is given an opportunity to make a pitch. Second part of the meeting, we talk about what's going on in Congress that week. And those can be feisty conversations. If we're talking about healthcare or taxes or Lord knows impeachment, those can be tough conversations. But I'm increasingly of the belief that good democracy is a bit like a good marriage. You don't necessarily agree with your partner on everything, but you got to be able to talk to each other and listen to each other without having every interaction turn into the Jerry Springer show. And then the final part of the meeting, we talk about a big, hairy issue facing the country and where we might be able to find some common ground. And listen, I don't want to mislead you into thinking we're sitting around the table holding hands and singing Kumbaya or closing our eyes and doing trust falls into each other's arms. We stopped doing that after we dropped a guy. But it is the hour of each week where I find myself thinking, gosh, we need to do more of that, not just as a Congress, but as a country too.
Thanks, Congressman. And I'm aware that you have a hard stop at 2:30, and so grateful for your time. So I'll challenge you with one more question that's come in several different ways. Following your note that compromise shouldn't be a dirty word, there's a question about how should we be responding to people who say that bridge building actually threatens getting important work done, that compromise means letting go of our values, and that reaching across the aisle undermines success. Is there advice that you would give to either to bridge builders trying to speak with that particular perspective, or to folks that have that perspective?
I guess I have a couple reactions to that. One is a recognition that in divided government, if you want to do anything, it's going to take that type of bridge building and collaboration. And even if we didn't have divided government, if you want to make durable change that doesn't just get repealed when the Congress flips to a different party, or change that doesn't doesn't get repealed when we have a new president of a different party, we simply have to do that hard work. And listen, I get it. Like the politics of that are challenging. Listen, I will regularly get asked, gosh, we don't want you meeting with Republicans every week. We want you beating them. And, my reaction to that is, the vast majority of the folks I represent actually, to be honest, do not give a rip about whether we move more to the left or move more to the right. They just want to stop moving backwards. I have a lot of communities I represent that, are really hurting right now, and they cannot wait. They cannot wait until Democrats have massive majorities in every, legislative branch and have the executive branch. Like they need improvement in their lives right now. And so that's where I think this work is so important. It's why, I, have worked, I didn't come to Congress with a mission of chairing the Modernization Committee, but I did come to Congress wanting government to work for the folks I represent. And that's why this work has been satisfying and, in my view, pretty important. I do want to just make a quick plug for our final report. There's a lot of good data, a lot of good background on our recommendations, and includes a number of reform ideas that still need to be addressed going forward. It's just at modernizecongress.house.gov. So would certainly recommend it to you. And I'm really grateful for the reform organizations like yours that have given the committee, a hand throughout this process. For all who are watching, I hope we can count on your continued support.
Congressman, you can, we really appreciate these efforts. We appreciate your being here today. We're going to chat to everybody in this group, the link to the report, so folks can look directly at it. And we hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Take care. Stay well.
Thank you so much, Congressman. Thank you, David. What a wonderful session and dialogue. And we're so pleased and grateful for your work and your support of Convergence. Let me describe quickly now what's going to happen in the next few minutes, because we are moving into a break. The first 5 minutes of the break is really a bio break, and you should go and take care of whatever needs you might have. But when we come back at about 2:38, about 5 minutes from now, you're invited to join me for an amazing brief opportunity to breathe and stretch and rejuvenate together. Most of you know Jessica Dibb, who's a founding LC member and who's on our board for 8 years. Jessica is an international leader in the field of breathwork. She's co-director of the Professional Breathwork Alliance and is now writing a book on integrating breath practices into psychotherapy. And we're very lucky to have her as a part of the Convergence family. So again, at about 2:38, Jessica will lead us in some breathing and stretching for about 7 minutes. And we hope that she'll join us for that. And then when we return all together at 2:45, she'll spend another minute with us as a full group for a shared moment of reflection. So please feel free to turn off your camera if you're planning to step away from your computer, and turn it back when you're back in your seat. And we'll see you back hopefully in 5 minutes, but certainly by 2:45 for the start of the next session. Thank you.
Well, hi, everybody. I'm touched to spend this few minutes with you. We're going to take a little 6-step process. And as we do, I just want to remind everybody that the largest health study in the world, the Framingham study that went on over and is still going on over many decades, like 6 decades, has shown conclusively that the #1 predictor of both longevity and health, and also sort of a sense of well-being, is respiratory wellness. So #breathing is becoming one of the hottest things, surpassing yoga now in the world. It's something that we've known for a long time, and modern science is catching up to it. So I want to take us on a little 6-step journey through rejuvenating our bodies, hearts, minds, and spirits, for those whom that word works. Because the work that we do here in Convergence is critical, and I believe we will be more called upon to step up throughout our lifetime. So self-care, absolutely critical. So I invite you to close your eyes, and without trying to make your breath perfect, just deepen your breath. Just breathe a little bit deeper than you were breathing the minute before, or the breath before. And allow yourself to appreciate and savor that you breathe, that I breathe, that everyone here is breathing, and in fact, that all those people that voted for Biden and voted for Trump and didn't vote, and the people of the world that are watching, everybody's breathing together right now. Lean into that experience by deepening your breath, just a little bit. When we do this, we stimulate the polyvagal response, which is a place of well-being, which is a state of well-being and relaxation and accessing all of our resources. And so as we go through the next few minutes of practice, I want you to invite all those people who are breathing, which is everyone, to hope and wish that they too may experience well-being. Now, the second step is that I want you to notice what would help you right now in your body feel more present, feel more here. And I'm going to give 4 options. One is to soften your body, to relax your shoulders, your chest, your legs, your whole body. And that would mean that on the exhale, you just let go more, each exhale. A second would be that you actually kind of vibrate a little. And if you want to turn your camera off, you can like actually shake, like you're shaking off tension, shaking off the dust, or shaking up the life force. Third option would be that you actually stretch some part of your body that was feeling contracted. And a fourth would be that you energize your body by taking faster breaths. And we're just going to have 30 seconds for everybody to pick one or more of those things that feels like it'll help you be more here, be more in your body, to be more in the life you're actually living. Vibrating, softening, stretching, or energizing. And now we're going to invite ourselves to train our bodies to breathe even just a little more optimally than they already are. Put one hand on your belly and one hand on the center of your chest. And be aware that when you inhale, the most important thing is that your belly actually relaxes and moves out so that the diaphragm has maximum room to contract and pull in a volume of air. So when you breathe in, let your belly go out. Now put both hands on your rib cage and let your rib cage expand. And then put your hand back up on your chest and feel your chest rise. When you breathe out, the chest is going to let go, then the rib cage is going to let go, and then the belly's going to be flat. Don't worry if this doesn't feel natural or normal to you yet, or it's just a beginning of an invitation. We're going to do about 3 to 5 breaths of optimal breathing. So the beginning of the inhale is the relaxing of the belly. The middle of the inhale is the rib cage moving out. And the end of the inhale is the lungs and the chest actually rising. And then we let go. So I'll let each of you do that in your own pace. 3 to 5, maybe 6 optimal breaths. Know that while you're doing this, you're resetting cortisol levels, your autonomic nervous system is getting reset, you're stimulating polyvagal response. You are getting more access to all of your resources. Somatic intelligence, emotional intelligence, and cognitive intelligence. Now, the next step is, as we continue to do these optimal breaths, bring your awareness to your feet for 1 or 2 breaths. The sense of inhabiting your feet, feeling your feet on the ground as you're breathing optimally. And now bring your awareness to your spine. We don't need to sit with a straight spine. We need to sit with a relatively straight spine, whatever is comfortable, but be aware of your breath supporting cerebral spinal fluid moving through your spine. And maybe your spine gets a little more flow during this next breath. And now, as you continue to optimally breathe, be aware of your hands, the palms of your hands, as if your breath is actually moving into your hands. Beautiful. Now, our 5th step is we continue to optimally breathe. allow yourself to become aware of what you are most grateful for about your life. Your health, the situation you find yourself in, a loved one, a child, friend, your vocation, the trees that you're looking at right now, the opportunity to live in a democracy, whatever it is that you feel grateful for at this time in your life in 2020, while you optimally breathe, let the gratitude flow. And please, if there's a tear that comes to your eye or a smile that comes to your face or a little tremor that goes through you or anything like that, just allow it, because that is somatic and emotional intelligence at work. And the world that we as Convergence want to invite is a world in which everyone is free to feel what they feel and think what they think. So let's practice it ourselves. And as we continue to optimally breathe, let's also become aware of the hard things of our life right now. And in this year, perhaps, there have been challenges. Probably fear, probably anger, probably grief for everyone. Let yourself breathe with that, not like those are problems, but like they're intelligent responses to rapidly changing situations. And let us invite all of ourselves back to this present moment with our breath. So be with any sense of hard, challenge, sadness, grief, loss, anger, fear. Like we're not abandoning ourselves. And now let us come back to gratitude with each optimal breath. And this time I'm going to invite us to feel gratitude for our Convergence community, that we get to be here today and everything from the past and everything that will move forward. Just let yourself breathe with that gratitude. And our last step is those hands, those feet, that spine that we were breathing with. Imagine walking that into the world. Imagine shaking hands with that breathing in your hands with people when we finally get, or fist bumping, or whatever we get to do for now, or air hugs. Your eyes, your chest, your feet. Imagine being with everyone from this. This will be a way of self-care and other care simultaneously. And since I know we're now all here and we're about to begin again, I'll just say this so we can have a shared collective moment. Neuroscience tells us that our primitive brain is wired for in-group, out-group. And that is why it is so easy from a place of survival to see differences that are threatening, that their gender, skin color, religious orientation, language, socioeconomic status, political beliefs. We can pose any kind of enemy, as Gandhi would say, from that perspective. There's only one group that we cannot do that with, and that's the group of breathers. We are all breathers. Democrat, Republican, independent, non-voter, apathy person, any skin color, gender. And I invite us in honor and also in support of our Convergence mission to just spend 30 seconds breathing together in the one group of breathers. That is everyone that Convergence is committed to serving.
Jessica, thank you so much for this wonderful moment that you led us through. I certainly feel refreshed and much more relaxed. So I really appreciate your guidance and your sharing your talents with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we're going to, so we're going to shift gears now into our next conversation. And colleagues, we've spent about an hour and a half together talking about the impact of the election on Convergence, the bridge building work that our projects embody, and that of Congress. We're going to move now into a discussion of the broader bridge building field of which Convergence is a part. First, I want to give you a bit of a sense of how this field is really exploding. We're running quickly through a series of images just to give you a feel for how many organizations are focused on bridge building. You can see the attention to bridge building continues to gain momentum. Some of these are organizations that have been around for a while, others are new or have launched new initiatives. Since David joined Convergence, he has shared his excitement about the emerging wave of organizations that have been involved in bridge building. And we've been developing relationships with many of the colleagues in the field. Omar and I have been doing work to build out individual relationships, and I'm really thrilled that several of those partners are going to be with us in the next discussion. And of course, the incoming Biden administration has emphasized the priority of bridge building for America. So what, you may be thinking, are the implications for Convergence of all this increased focus on bridge building? What's the significance for us of the huge expansion of the bridge building field? And in the poll at the beginning of the day, about half of you were very prioritizing that as a top question for us to grapple with. So before David opens up the dialogue, we'd like to get your take on that question through a quick poll. The question is, what is the connection between the success of the broader bridge building field and the success of Convergence? And you can select as many of these as you think are applicable. Would you say that for Convergence to succeed sustainably, we need funders and others to see the broader field as relevant and valuable? Would you see that if Convergence, or would you say that if Convergence maintains high quality and high impact programs, the organization will succeed just fine, regardless of the rest of the field? Would you say that supporting the field, Convergence is helping other organizations to succeed at its own detriment? Or would you say that by engaging in co-opetition, this notion of cooperation and competition at the same time, organizations can support greater success by all, right? The notion of all boats rising. So please check as many of those as you think apply. We'll give the poll just another minute. Okay, Doozy, I think we'll end and turn it over to you, David.
Thanks very much, Amanda. Very interesting that the two that really lead here are for Convergence to succeed sustainably. We need funders and others to see the broader field as important and strong, and also by engaging in co-opetition, organizations can support greater success by all. So thank you for that. And now I'm really excited to bring together some of the leaders in what I think of as the bridge building field. Joan Blades with Living Room Conversations. Living Room Conversations drives local conversations, changing affective behavior, and increasing respect and empathy among groups that span the ideological, economic, political, demographic, and other divides. Jillian Youngblood runs Common Ground Solutions, which is also local And in addition to the affective behavior change, Common Ground Solutions also focuses on engaging people across differences in finding their common ground on key issues of the day. Michael Murphy, who runs Fix Us out of the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, manages national networking around a group that supports strengthening American democracy, within which bridge building is a subgroup. And we've benefited a lot from being a part of that network. Fred Riley runs Weavers, the Social Fabric Project at the Aspen Institute. And they are building an extensive coalition that supports hundreds of organizations that are launching and growing at the local level to help normalize bridge building behavior through basically grassroots culture change. I want to thank each of you for being here. Let's just start off. I would love to hear from each of you as we go into this conversation, how each of your organizations supports and does bridge building, and also whether there's a real change in how you're going to be doing it now moving forward. Why don't we, Fred, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, of course. So good afternoon, everybody. And David and team, thank you so much for allowing me to be here and take part in the part of the meeting that I've taken part in so far. I think, our thoughts are that if you look at the research, is more divided than we ever were before, and that we see the differences in our divides as really bad things. And our hope is that at some point we'll begin to see that we have more in common than we have differences. I think when David Brooks started this work a couple of years ago, he talked about the notion of our country being divided, that people cared about themselves more than others, and that we needed to swoop in and help with programming to show people that there's some commonalities that we all share. But once we jumped into the space, we recognized that there were so many people already out there working and doing bridge building, and there was no need for one more group to come in to show people how to build bridges. But what our work should center on is how do we support the people who are already actively working in communities and helping to build bridges. And so our work has centered around, or our pivot is on, how do we connect those bridge builders with each other so that they can learn new tools, new practices, but more importantly, how do we connect them with the resources they need to do their work better? How do we inspire others to figure out how to pick up the mantle so that they can start bridge building in their own communities? And how do we advance the work of bridge building so that people all around the world understands what it's like or what it is and how they can begin the process to bridge building? So we've said completely that our work is to back up out of the space of creating programming, but more importantly, how do we support the local efforts that are already happening? We know that communities around the country are grappling with trust, and we want to help build the social trust in the country, because we know that if we increase social trust, we increase all these different things, from voting to how people view each other, how people view their neighbors, how they view their friends, and how we will essentially get back on track. So that's where we are, and that's how we view the space and our role in helping to support it.
Thank you. Joan.
Well, Living Room Conversations is a opportunity for small groups of people to talk. And it's kind of an entryway into considering reaching out to people who might have different views and listening to each other. And we're doing it pretty much by video these days, which has been going on for years, but it used to be in person in faith communities and libraries and bookstores, as well as living rooms. And we work with partners all the time, because we are a piece of the puzzle, an open source resource for any group that wants to be inviting in others or giving a opportunity to talk about your own personal relationship. For example, we have a guns and responsibility conversation, and we are looking forward to doing a high profile living room conversation in partnership with Convergence. And that will hopefully bring more grassroots attention to the topic and get people talking about talking with each other about their own relationships with guns. And it allows people to start seeing the nuance in issues. So we have over 100 conversation guides, and we're always writing new ones with partners and learning from the people using the conversations to be improving what's happening. And certainly right now is a wonderful time for Convergence to be bringing us all together to be doing this in a collaborative way, because honestly, we need to shift. I feel a little bit like I'm in Groundhog's Day if we don't, advance in our practices. We're going to end up in the same place 4 years from now. And this is as far from election as we can be. So it's an opportune moment for us all to just jump into this.
Jillian.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's really wonderful to be here with all of you today. We show people that in many cases, they actually may not need to build a bridge because there's a good chance that they're already standing on some common ground. So our work has three components. The first is lifting up the evidence that Americans actually agree on a lot of specific policy proposals already. So we work with the University of Maryland Program for Public Consultation. They designed these exercises called policymaking simulations. People do them online. They take 20 or 30 minutes. You go through a process of getting some education on an issue and then read these really well-crafted, well-balanced, reviewed by experts on both sides of the aisle, pro and con statements for all of these different proposals. And then University of Maryland fields those as surveys nationwide. So from that, we get this wealth of data that shows where when people, instead of taking a snap poll, do you think we should ban chokeholds? When people go through a thought process in a deliberative way, we have found through this research more than 150 specific policy proposals where majorities of Republicans and Democrats already agree. I thought Congressman Kilmer really hit the nail on the head earlier when he said Congress can't even make progress on the issues where there is consensus, and cited transportation. And we know that to be true. We want to normalize that if elected officials can consult with their constituents and do things that reflect what their constituents already think, that we can make a lot of progress. And dozens of those 150, by the way, are of those specific proposals are proposals that President-elect Biden has already promoted on the campaign trail. And I really appreciated something that Bruce Bond, if he's still here, said earlier in the chat, which is that we need some quick wins to demonstrate that consensus can actually happen, that this can work. And I would say that this data is a list of what those quick wins could be. I'm taking a long time to get through my three. That was number one. Number two is that we hold events called part of our citizen panel initiative, where we field those surveys in specific congressional districts so that people can see where they stand in relation to their neighbors. We always find a lot of common ground between Republicans and Democrats when we do these, even in very red and very blue districts. And then we invite members of Congress to come to those events so they can actually have a dialogue with their constituents. And then very quickly, the last piece of it is educating people about where the levers in government are that can accomplish the things that they want to see, whatever their policy priorities are.
Thank you. Michael.
Well, thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, David. It's great to be with this panel, for sure. And I just love Convergence. I mean, just want to put that out there. Everything you guys do, I've just been big supporters of you for a long time. So I'm just really happy to be honored to part of this conversation. So let me talk a little bit about Fix Us. What is Fix Us? What is it? How does it relate to? It's housed within the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. Let me explain that a little bit of what's going on here. Some of you may be familiar with the committee. The committee is a nonpartisan fiscal policy organization, been around for a long time. In addition to being director of Fix Us, I'm also chief of staff at the committee. So this project Fix Us is housed within a fiscal policy organization. So what's that about? Okay, so we came to the recognition within the last few years that we will continue to advance our mission of fiscal responsibility, but we believe that sustainable policy solutions on a range of issues, budget policy, and many, many more, are going to be elusive until we get at the root of what's going on with our polarization and divisions in this country. And so we decided to launch a separate initiative called Fix Us that is not about the budget. It's separate from that. And as David alluded to, what we focus on with Fix Us, and we just launched it earlier this year, is we actually also focus on three things also, Jillian, and I'll try and go through them quick too. Three things we do for Fix Us is one, we do research analysis and events to try and bring attention to the drivers of polarization in the country. Second is what David referenced specifically, and I think what is relevant to this conversation today, is we do build networks of groups involved within the broader democracy field and trying to address polarization, to kind of build connections, build strategies, build collaborations, because we think that's important. And third is we do advance citizen dialogue with our supporters on to try and find common values and solutions to address these issues. And so with that sort of topper, I guess, David, I'll pose a couple of specific responses to your question of how you're kind of thinking about this in light of the election, where the field is, and this question of growing the field. What I would say is kind of 2 points come to my mind as been reflecting on this. One has to do with how at least we approach this question of field building, bridge building from Fix Us, and that's just with the point that we actually think that bridging divides is across two axes. Okay, all right. There's obviously a left-right axis here. We're very divided from a left-right perspective. It's now, as everyone knows, been increasingly sorted on top of that left-right divide by race, gender, geography, et cetera. So we're very divided from a left-right perspective. But we're also divided on a vertical axis. You can call it elites versus the public. You can call it institutions versus the citizenry, where the result of that divide is that people are feeling very disconnected, alienated, not having a voice in the political process. And what I love, and what I've been reflecting on about the bridge building field as it is, and it exists, and it is, I think, poised for a lot of growth, it is working incredibly to close the divides and gaps across both those axes, right? I think if you're talking about the group on this call that's doing amazing work, Joan's work in terms of living room conversation, we're bringing people together across perspectives. But then when you're talking about how do we find that common ground, those consensus solutions that you can take from the citizenry and inform the broader institutions and public here and build some connection and give a voice, I think that's really, really important. The second point I'll make, and I'll wrap here, is I've been reflecting on when you evaluate the broader democracy field, there's an incredibly growing, robust field working right now to try and address polarization. It's huge. That slide deck you showed is a lot of groups. It's actually exponentially bigger than that, because there's tons of groups that are working to, deal with, say, money in politics, or redistricting reform, or primary reform, or national service, or several other things. And the point there is that I think that the bridge building field is poised right now to have a much bigger seat at that table, right? Because I think a lot of people are recognizing, based on this election, how divided we are, and that we need to form ways to normalize that behavior. And I think we can do a lot to bring attention to it and put it on par with some of these other reform efforts that are out there in the democracy space. So
Michael, let me just drill into that point a little bit more. I love the idea that what we're all about is trying to normalize bridge building behavior at a lot of different levels and across a lot of different axes. You talk about the bridge building field being poised to do this, and all of us are sitting on a lot of conference calls these days. I feel like this is a little bit of an old home discussion almost with the field. So would love to know, Mike, what do you think are the areas where the field currently, as this sort of cottage industry, is really well poised and well equipped to drive the kind of change that we want? And where does the field have serious work to do to be well poised and well equipped to do the kind of work we're all talking about?
I'll offer a couple thoughts. On the first, in terms of where we're poised, I'd say two things. One is, so this has already, I think, been brought up. Look, the outcome of the election means a couple of different things, we think. Obviously, that with having a new incoming administration, one of which that has been explicitly talking about the need to bridge divides, I think that creates a real obvious opportunity are poised as a field to try and inject ourselves into that discussion, to offer ourselves as a resource to an incoming administration, and how can we help in that regard. The other is, regardless of the outcomes of the Georgia runoffs, this is going to be incredibly close, divided Congress. I've been reflecting on the historical anomaly of the fact that this is going to be potentially an incoming administration with not having the Congress in their control coming in for the first time since the early 90s. First time a Democrat has had that as president since like Grover Cleveland. Okay, so the opportunity to make the case and show where there is common ground on policies, right? Some of the work to say what Jillian's doing is going to be really important for a closely divided Congress. And I think that there are some real opportunities as a field to inject in that. In terms of where we need work, I think there is more attention that needs to be brought to this field. To your poll question, the one that had the most support, I think there needs to be more attention brought to it, that people understand kind of what it is, understand the different sort of axes and domains across what this field does, and actually understand that it can have an impact similar to what maybe some of these other kind of fields of democracy reform can. And what I mean by that is it's very tangible when you look at money in politics reform or redistricting reform and say, hey, we passed that, X leads to Y. Here, the need needs to be that there's a huge field out there that can work together to scale this, because that's what people wonder, can we scale this? That if it was more known, more coordinated, more as defined field working together, I think can achieve that and address that challenge.
Fred, if we took that same question about what we're ready to do and what we still need to get ourselves ready to do, and you applied it to the hundreds of local organizations that are signing on to your coalition and that are that want to be really helpful at a local level, but really are resource constrained. They're pretty new. A lot of them are volunteer staffed. What's your sense on whether that set of organizations is ready? And I would just distinguish those organizations from for example, living room conversations or common ground solutions, which do have local conversations, but they operate with a more resourced capacity.
Yeah, so I think they are ready and poised now more than ever, because as we look at the research and the data on social trust and where it's actually built, it's built in those local neighborhoods, those local communities. That's the place where trust is built. I think if you take it a step further, and what are they ready for, or how can they get ready? I think this notion of separate entities or us working alone or essentially as competitors, right? I don't think that there are competitors in this space at all, but I think what the competition is divide in the country. And so how do we work together on a common framework, a common agenda, a common goal? That doesn't mean the aims of the work you're doing has to change, but we're all chasing a North Star. And so we can prepare to get ready for the North Star versus but still keep light on where you're headed. I think it's fine, but I think the only way our folks locally and anybody else around the country who's doing work like this is really going to be able to say that we're having some headway and reaching our goals is if we start marching up the hill together versus trying to get there separately, because there are strength in numbers, there's strength in common knowledge, there's strength in common agendas and common words. And if we can hunker down and say, yeah, I want to keep my same focus, but I'm going to hunker down into what they're doing, I think it's going to be really helpful for, as a movement, the movement to go further.
Thank you. Joan, when you look at how the conversations are happening at a lot of places, do you see that those conversations are changing sufficiently over time that we have to keep relearning how to be successful at bridge building? Or does it feel to you at this point that you've sort of got it down? You kind of, that there are certain pieces of dealing with folks coming together locally that don't really matter where we are in the election cycle?
The core structure is really solid and proven. But take a topic. So we have over 100 topic guides. Immigration has been rewritten 3 or 4 times over the last 10 years. Not because the guide was wrong, but because the environment we're living in keeps on changing and needs to be updated. I mean, what's so lovely about this call with this group is we're all complementary to each other. Like living room conversations, well, the conversations were local when they were in libraries and bookstores and in homes. But at this point, most of them are by video, which happily has been going on for years also. And, research has shown is, similarly successful, both short-term and longer term, which is pretty cool. And because we have self-sorted so successfully, I live in Berkeley. My ability to hang out with conservatives is limited, but I hang out with friends all around the country very easily by video. We have millions of people now that are comfortable doing video. And the intimacy that is actually possible in a small 6-person conversation on video is kind of phenomenal. Now, I prefer being in person and sharing cookies and things, but sometimes I don't get to, and we have people using them to stay close to their family or to reconnect with family. So it's, we keep on learning from our users how this can be helpful. But, living room conversations, I often think of ladders of engagement. It's the entryway. It's one of the ways to start on engagement in bridge building. It's just when you discover you like people that are very different from you, you become a little bit more open to things. And then some of these actions together become far more likely. But any group, we're really welcoming their leadership and working with them because, as you noted, this is a lightly resourced area. And, coming from the progressive movement, right, massive monies go into the environmental movement. And people know what they want. And it's very hard for people to resource something where we say, well, we aren't actually giving a specific outcome. That, I think, is something that makes it hard for this whole movement to get the resourcing that it really needs.
That's right. And in a second, I want to ask you all about resourcing, and the challenging question about where we as organizations are competing and where we are best in coordination mode. And resources is certainly one that's a challenge. But first, Jillian, one of the things that I know our leadership council will care a lot about it. We'll take a year, 18 months to build consensus across leaders who bring very differing perspectives on some of the same issues that you build policy briefs around. And you tend to drive success within some of your common ground solutions where you're able to bring locals to sort of understand what their common ground on issues are. Do you have a sense on sort of where the core difference is, why it takes us 18 months at a national level and you drive some kinds of consensus in one meeting?
I love that question, and I love Convergence's approach to this. I think that commitment to deliberation is very difficult to find. Certainly your group realistically digs into the details probably more than ours does. Our folks might think, we do think about cost and implementation and the trade-offs of things. A butterfly flaps its wings on somewhere in the budget and then everything changes. But I think one thing that we both find through these groups is that we do have some fundamental values that everybody is interested in. And I think a parallel is that we kind of need, and this is something that I think the entire field is doing, is that people kind of need a permission structure to find common ground. So I thought, again, Congressman Kilmer said something else that I thought was interesting, talking about that constituent who said, I don't know any Trump voters, and I posted on Facebook that I wanted to meet one, and I wasn't, and everyone made fun of me for it. I've had that experience too. There's no permission structure to say, hey, I would like to open myself up a little bit and, and meet a new person and learn something new. So I think, I think there are a couple different ways of going about it, and you can get into different levels of detail, but I think we're really doing things on a parallel track.
Thanks. So I have, I know that Mike and Fred, you both are organizationally sort of inside the concept of growing a field. Joan and Jillian, you're running organizations and simultaneously, kind of like Convergence, figuring out how to navigate how field building connects with the core programs that you're running. So when we're talking about this field as fundamentally made up of organizations that have areas of competition, even as we aspire to so much of the same mission and aspirations for America, how do you imagine the way you allocate resources or think about how you balance running your programs on the one hand and being part of the kinds of conversations that I see you in and that I'm in all the time, but constantly feeling torn between the two? How do you guys manage that?
Well, for me, the objective is this shift. And, living room conversations is a very distinct tool, which is open source and we just keep on learning from. So it doesn't feel like balancing at all, honestly. It just feels we have this shared vision of a real change in dynamics where we become functional. And, the core of it is seeing each other's humanity. I am not attached, living room conversations is not attached to any outcome other than respectful connection. But then I really love it that people go on. If they don't have the ability to go on and work on actual things, that's not actually good. So it's very natural to need and want the other part of the whole bridging community. Because once you're in connection, you have the people that we're missing, you may need some kind of facilitated process. You almost certainly do.
I see a lot of, I don't feel competitive with the other groups in this space at all. I think it's very much a place where a rising tide lifts all boats. I was kind of thinking about us the other day in the context of maybe the advertising industry or some other force that has a huge impact on public opinion. I mean, Dove body wash a couple of years ago got us to all buy soap because they told us it was about body inclusivity. In the 1920s, cigarette manufacturers got women to smoke so that they could sell more cigarettes. This is a terrible example. But this kind of, it meant the pie got bigger for all of these people who were selling things. So if what we're selling is this model of consensus, then I think the more of us doing it and talking about it in all of our different ways to all of our different constituencies is good for everyone in the field.
Thank you. So Mike and Fred, I want to ask the same question flipped a little different. When Mike, when you're focused on growing the networking and the connectivity among organizations with the same aspirations, and Fred, as you're building this really powerful coalition, especially with these hundreds of emergent local groups focused on bringing Americans together, and you look at us in the field, how do you see us as where we're competing and where we can better be coordinating?
Take that first, Fred, I guess.
Go ahead.
Look, I think there is competing for money. I mean, let's be serious. I mean, there's obviously competing. I mean, I know, Jillian, like you said, I don't think we feel ourselves as competitors. I think that's true, and I would agree with that from everyone I know in this field broadly, I would say. But I think that the reality is it's a limited pool of money that is out there. And I think that that is a reality. And I think that, you know, where there are opportunities for specific collaboration between multiple organizations within the sort of bridge building field, I think that is an appeal to those with resources that show that these are organizations that they are working together to try and scale their efforts more broadly. So I think that's just one thing I would say. The other thing I would say is that, you know, there is a just need. I think I said this at the outset, but I do think this is true, that when you think about the bridge building field in relationship to other sorts of efforts that are trying to improve the health of our democracy, it's a harder leap, I think, for people that are not as connected to it to see how this is going to change the operating structure in our country from A to Z, because they immediately go to these issues of scale. They go, well, that's great, but if we were able to have this experience for everybody, well, then I'm with you, right? And so, but the point I would make there is I think we're actually at a really interesting opportunity for the field. I think there's a lot of people in this field that are bought into the idea that if we somehow are more connected, somehow more working together, the rising tide lifts all boats idea can be really helpful in addressing that issue. And the other issue is technology, the Jones point. I actually think we're at some point here where you could actually make the case that from a technological perspective and the incredible experience we're living through right now, it opens up opportunities for scaling that a year ago people would have never even thought was possible, right? So I think those are some thoughts, David, on how you think about sort of the competition, but also the sort of where I think there's areas where this collaboration can really potentially make a difference.
You know, to echo or add to the point, I think we think a lot about the strength of numbers, and it is bigger for me to walk in a room and talk about funding with a corporation who's giving out dollars for bridge building or whatever we're working on around the country, when I say I have 100 different communities who are ready and willing to work on this particular issue, or they already are. We recognize pretty quickly that our role in that is not to create the policy or the procedures on it, but we recognize that the local experts are already have this the savviness and how to kind of get us there. And what we need to do is to help them on the path there, which is, I think about a lot of our work is that I worked for the YMCA for about 15 years. And so a lot of camps, right? So our folks around the country are scaling the side of a mountain with a backpack on with their entire community in tow. My job is to really take some of those things out of their backpack so they can get up there a little easier, but to also provide resources to them once they get to the top. And so we've heard from corporations and folks with big purse strings that say, we want to give money to these local groups, but I can't give to 300 groups. Can you help us? And so the idea of us moving as not even just as a field, but as a coalition to say, here's our North Star, we're going to go together on this, it's going to be more helpful to really bring communities together, because they're more that connects us than that separates us. Just like we say to these buckets of work that we're working in, we have to say that the same thing to the people who are working in this space as well. And so somebody has to step out and say, I'm going to be the leader. Will you all come along with me? We say that we can lead in certain spaces, but we are also sharing the power because the local experts are our weavers and not us, right? I can be savvy enough to guide us in a direction, but the local weavers understand really intimately how to move communities forward, not me.
Thanks, Fred, very much. And I want to acknowledge that this conversation wasn't as full or long because we started late, and now we have to get everyone to one more conversation before 4 o'clock. I also really hope it's the beginning. I know how much I appreciate working with each of you on field building activities, and how much I learn from each of your leadership and your organizations. And I would recommend to folks on this call, if any of this is interesting, you really should check out Living Room Conversations, Common Ground Solutions, Fix Us, and Weave. So with that, Thank you very much. And I want to note one more thing. It's interesting to me that this always seems to be the last and hardest question. We didn't get to the question that we spoke about earlier, which is, why is it so challenging in the bridge building space to have the kind of racial diversity that we'd like to have among organizations? So I know we don't have time to answer that, but I hope it's okay for this audience to at least raise and know that all of us share that concern and are leaning into ways to manage that. With that, thank you very much, and I'll turn it back, Amanda, to you.
Thank you, David, and thank you to all of our bridge building leaders. And I also want to thank all of you that are contributing so richly to the chat conversation. There's a lot of resources and just thoughtful contributions there. So thank you for that, and please keep it up. So we've covered a great deal today about the work that we have individually and collectively to take on. We want to spend our last chunk of time together picking up the mirror and really thinking together about how the evolution of this group, this leadership council, can best support and contribute to all of Convergence's work. So with that, Doozy, I'll turn it over to you, Mark, and Rachel.
Thanks, Amanda. So it might seem odd to invite a conversation about the future of the Leadership Council, since for some of you today, it's your first Leadership Council meeting. However, if you're here today, something about the Leadership Council intrigued you. So we would love your input, just as we look forward to the input of our longtime friends and leaders of the organization on the call today. So some quick context. In the early days, Convergence's Leadership Council consisted of a group of stalwarts sitting around a conference table and working together to get this organization off the ground. It's evolved into a 60-person body that, until this year, met twice a year in Washington, D.C., and once a year in San Francisco. The meetings like this one have grown so that they're attended by a mix of leaders, donors, partners, and new friends just getting to know us. It's evolved in a largely organic way to meet the needs of a growing organization and the growing Convergence community. By taking a step back in this moment, we want to take the opportunity to intentionally shape the Leadership Council with your input. So we started this by convening a next generation Leadership Council working group to share ideas about how the Leadership Council might evolve. This group met over the summer. And last month, we asked Leadership Council members and regular guests to fill out a survey to give us even more input. Today's discussion will help us further refine our vision for the future of the Leadership Council. I want to state clearly that we do not want to change the things about the Leadership Council that everyone loves. That is not our intent. What we do want to do is make the leadership program even more fulfilling for those who participate, and to help the Leadership Council make an even stronger contribution to Convergence's work. So I want to thank Mark Zitter and Rachel Fursch for joining me in organizing this discussion today. Mark and Rachel are both members of the Leadership Council who have played active parts in the Next Generation Leadership Council Working Group. And I know Rachel has been coming to us with ideas for a couple of years now with ways we might strengthen the bonds of Leadership Council members. And Mark has also recently really advanced the conversation with a suggestion that we add committees. So Mark and Rachel, why do you think it's important to be having this conversation, and what do you hope we get out of it? Mark, please.
I'll start. I think as both obviously Convergence and the nation are entering new eras, it's always good to review all of our major efforts and figure out if they're still necessary and optimally structured. I think the Leadership Council is definitely necessary, particularly as an avenue for friends of the organization to be involved without necessarily having to make a full board commitment. But I think it's a good time to refresh or to think about whether we've got the right structure overall, the purpose and the structure for the LC. I'll tell you that in my experience with a lot of nonprofit organizations, their boards, advisory committees, and leadership councils, a very common refrain I hear is that the members don't feel like their talents, skills, capabilities are being optimally used. And it's interesting because the leaders usually worry that they're asking too much of these skilled volunteer leaders, while the leaders themselves feel like not enough they're not sure how to become more involved. They want to contribute more, but they're not sure how. Now, I'm sure all of us are here on this call in the Leadership Council because we believe in Convergence's mission and we're inspired by its actions. So we want to figure out how we can help. So my sense is we want to be an active part of it. We want to, at this point, review whether the LC, as currently organized, is doing the most it can for convergence, and also is getting the most out of all of us as volunteers, which is what we want.
Thanks, Mark. Rachel, do you have anything you'd add?
Mark covered most of it. I would just say, well, first, thank you to everyone who's still paying attention and participating right now. I know it's been a long day, so thanks for engaging. And all I would say is that new things are happening with Convergence. It's so much bigger than it was at the outset, and we have a chance now to be purposeful about how we run this piece of it. And so why wouldn't we take a look and do it? I'm really excited that hopefully we'll unlock a lot of new potential.
Thanks, Rachel. So I mentioned that we sent out a survey last month. Not everyone here on the call would have received it, but we did send the survey results as a pre-read for this meeting, and we're sharing them in the chat. Just really at a high level, what we heard was that you enjoy Leadership Council meetings. Thank goodness. They're one of the primary ways you connect with us, and you want to keep connecting with us in that way. And so you think that we should continue to host 3 times a year, that they should involve an eclectic group the way this meeting does, and that in the future, we should consider a hybrid model of virtual and in-person. Makes perfect sense. And of course, the other thing that we kind of heard loud and clear is that you want to be more engaged in our projects, our dialogues. You like receiving project updates, and if the Leadership Council were to have committees, something we want to get more input from you on today, you generally overwhelmingly would like to serve on a committee connected to a Convergence project or issue area. We've also just had a conversation about the bridge building field today, and that's another topic we'd love to have the Leadership Council involved in. So maybe that could be a committee topic. So Mark and Rachel, any quick reactions to the survey results when you saw them?
Rachel, will start.
I was going to ask you to start, Mark. I thought about how I would answer this, and I think, one, I was thrilled that people really seemed engaged enough to want to answer a survey and have opinions about how they want things to be shaped going forward. 2, there seemed to be a lot of support for committees and volunteer committee leaders and LC leadership. And so I'm hoping that means a bunch of people want to volunteer to be those leaders, not just they're hoping other people will do it. And 3, I do think the conversation we have today will be really important because everyone's here right now. And so even if you didn't fill out the survey, like I look forward to hearing what people have to say, but I do hope that we're coming closer to a consensus so we can actually get started with something new.
Mark, do you add anything to
My
that?
sense was, yeah, clearly the LC members do want to connect with Convergence, and the main way they want to do it is through the LC. And echoing my previous comments, people want to contribute more. They want to serve on a committee. They want to make sure that they make a financial contribution, and they think that Convergence should have more expectations and probably more structured expectations for them. I think those are all things that are very doable as we reimagine the LC.
Great. Okay, so we're going to move into breakout groups. We want to move the discussion further. So with that, we created a document that lays out a proposed future for the Leadership Council. We're sharing it in the chat right now, and we're going to ask you to, in smaller groups, react to it. Certainly at a high level, what are your reactions to this proposal for the Leadership Council? Is it something you'd want to be part of? If not, why not? What's missing? What would you add? And an important piece of this is how do we enroll future members who represent a broader diversity of perspectives and experiences? This was an important conversation in the Next Generation Leadership Council Working Group, and we want the Leadership Council to evolve in a way that is inviting. And when we say broader diversity, we mean it in many ways, especially race, age, and politics. So with that, we are going to move into breakout rooms. Thank you, Jag, for taking us away. Welcome back. Rachel, how was your experience in your room?
It was great. I mean, it's great. I don't know how big everybody else's rooms were, but we only had 4 people. So we got a really engaged conversation. One point that came up that we realized we haven't discussed is someone asked, how does one become a member of the Leadership Council? And so that's probably something we might want to address.
Great. Mark, do you want to share the poll with everyone?
Sure, let's keep the poll. The poll is really about how people think about the Leadership Council and what we have proposed. So we can pull up that poll. So the question of the straw man proposal that we put together, what do you think? You think it looks great? You can't wait for it to be implemented? You like it, but you want to talk to people first about a few changes you would suggest, things you don't like, and of course, we hope in that case you'll also tell us what those are. Or you like the current model better and don't want things to change much. And the current model, of course, is much less defined, but certainly has fewer specific requirements or expectations that are articulated. Let's all vote on that and see what we say. All right, Dizzy, and I can't see how many people filled it out, so whenever we're ready. Great, okay, so we got more than half the people saying it looks terrific. Another third saying, I like it, but would like to talk about some modifications, which is great. So thank you for that. Thanks for everybody, both for their participation today and also for your attention to what this LC can become to make it work even better for Convergence and better for all of you.
Thank you, Mark and Rachel, and thanks everyone for your input today. We look forward to incorporating and announcing any improvements to the Leadership Council program in 2021. And I know that the breakouts were a little bit shorter than we originally hoped. So if you wanted to send any thoughts in via email or in the chat, we'd love to get your thoughts. So I'm open, doozy@convergencepolicy.org. Okay, but until 2021.
And also I would just note if anybody answered that they like it, but would like to speak to Convergence staff or board member, that would also be reach out to Doozy. Let's actually make that happen.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you. So just a quick thing, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Amanda and we're going to let you go. So if you are a Leadership Council member, and even if you are not, we do hope that you will please remember Convergence in your year-end giving. We've heard over and over today that there is so much need for Convergence's work in this post-election and crisis recovery environment. So we thank you for your support. And we are chatting a link to our donation page right now. That's it. Thank you all for your thoughts today.
Thank you, Doozy. So exciting to be re-envisioning how our LC works. At the same time, we had such a terrific set of discussions today. We talked about the implications of the election, about our work, we gave a leadership award to Representative Kilmer and talked about how we're moving forward in Congress and our projects and connection with other organizations in the field. And then we came back together to discuss how we can do even better. So I feel inspired and energized. I'll invite each of you that's still with us to share a word in the chat about how you are feeling as we near the end of our time together. Please go ahead and chat your 1 word or 2 words that you'd like to share. And then more formally, we'd like to ask you to take a few minutes to fill out a meeting evaluation, which we're also sharing in the chat, a link to that. And that's really important in helping us plan future meetings. I want to thank the team, especially Doozy, Jag, Omar, Angela, Dawn, and Kayla, who made all of the magic happen behind the scenes. And thank you, all of you who were here to join us in today's LC meeting. It was really terrific to see everyone. We're going to end the formal part of the meeting now, but we're going to leave our Zoom room open for another 15 minutes or so. We did this at Rob's event and just wanted to invite people to stay, complete your evaluation while you're here and chat with us and chat with each other in the next few minutes. And then we'll close the Zoom room at about 1:15. Thank you for your time today and have a good rest of the day.